Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome again to one of our podcasts here at The Way Forward. Today, we are honored to have the distinguished gentleman, Duke Deluca, with us, Brigadier General retired, United States Army. Duke is a professional Corps of Engineer officer. He's been retired for a few years now. In fact, he's been my mentor in retirement to help me to understand the different nuances of being a consultant and being an entrepreneur and standing up a business from scratch. And just about every 6 months, I call Duke and say, Duke, where are you at in your progress? I see the changes that he's made and I adjust accordingly. So for our audience and for any clients who are looking at this is a gentleman who understands entrepreneurialism more than most anyone I've had the opportunity to meet, work with, or coach. So Duke, welcome. Good morning.
Thanks for having me, Chris. Appreciate it.
It's an honor to have you. So, we were talking before the show started about some of your current projects with the Corps of Engineers. I think if it's even possible, I don't know if it's possible because the Corps of Engineers is such a unique and an interesting thing that exists in the United States. Can you give our audience an idea of what is the Army Corps? I mean, why isn't there an Air Force or a Navy Corps of Engineers? What is the Army Corps of Engineers been in existence pretty much the entire, history of our nation?
Well, even before our nation began. So George Washington was appointed on 14 June 1775 to take over the Continental Army. And on 16 June, he appointed an engineer for the Continental Army. So there's been an engineer corps since over a year before the country was formed through the Declaration of Independence. So just like the Army is a year older than the country, so are the Army engineers. And they do all sorts of things. The Corps of Engineers is an agency that does some crazy stuff that most people don't expect it to be involved in. But they also do the military engineering that you may think about if you've watched some war movies or done some history reading. So this combat engineering, which includes all sorts of stuff we can talk about if you want to, all the fighting engineering, there's construction, troop construction in home stations, in theaters of war. There's other construction that you can manage. There's geospatial information services, mapping. My shorthand for what the engineers do is sappers, combat engineers, mappers, divers. So Army diving owns 0 to 90 feet deep, and the Navy owns 90 feet and deeper. Most people don't know that. Army divers do all sorts of port repair and salvage and other stuff. Firefighters and builders. And the builders is every trade you can think of that is involved in horizontal and vertical construction. So there's 23 trades in the Corps of Engineers, in the Army engineers.
Well, let me ask you this then. So are the Corps of Engineers involved in the Key Bridge recovery efforts?
They're at the center of it. They're running the whole thing. Yes.
Tell us what they would be doing. Are they in charge? I mean, how does that?
Yes. So it depends on the event, the disaster, whatever has occurred, whether the Coast Guard or the Corps might be in charge, right? Where the waters are. So for the Deepwater Horizon you saw in the Gulf of Mexico, which was far offshore and away from a federal channel that the Corps of Engineers maintains, Coast Guard was in charge of that. There was an admiral from the Coast Guard in charge of that. For this is right on the federal channel, which is the highest priority for Congress. I mean, it's meant to be kept clear for commerce. It's very important to the economies of the Eastern Seaboard and Baltimore, particularly, that be able to receive commerce of all the depth vessels that it can take, and it's 55 feet, out through the Chesapeake into Baltimore Harbor. So that's it can take the biggest of the container ships, as well as it does a lot of roll-on, roll-off vessels there, because that's a big car export-import site.
It's huge. It's huge.
Yeah. So the Corps was involved. And first of all, it had to try to find a way, map the wreckage, what's in the federal channel, clear the federal channel first. That's number one priority, because that's inhibiting commerce and its safety, right? So now that they are almost complete with that, they have floated the vessel now, was stuck on there, and also a hazard in navigation, right? And it can be floated to a place where its fate will be determined. And I don't know admiralty law, and who's got liens against it now, and all sorts of stuff. So it'll be no doubt locked up on a pier for a few years while the court cases are resolved. But salvage of items in impeding the canal, the Corps is doing all that work. It already has a salvage mission with some vessels organic to it on hand in Baltimore, but now it has to contract for much larger salvage operations, right? Which is what's all being done through the Baltimore Engineer District, right? Which
So,
is
yeah,
right.
so I think, for the American people, public, this is very educational to understand what the Corps does and understand that, one of Washington's first moves was to establish this with understanding, what would be necessary for the nation in the future.
Sure.
How,
And it's
how
been
did,
really part of it. The agency wasn't really an agency until sort of later. It's an operating agency under the Army, Chief of Staff of the Army, and the Army Secretary, right? But it started out military engineering during the Continental Army and the war, the Revolutionary War, and then it moved very rapidly into safeguarding commerce along our coasts. It was building lighthouses along the coast.
right. Well, what wasn't the West Point's original design was to create more engineers to settle the West?
Correct. Not just to settle it, but to map it. We didn't even understand the continent we were on.
Yeah,
Right.
so the primary discipline of education at the United States Military Academy had been engineering for almost its entire life. It's only recently changed to have more, degrees outside of engineering. Is
That
that
is absolutely true. In fact, until the 1980s, I want to say it didn't offer anything but, technical degrees at West Point.
yeah,
Jefferson created it because we didn't have enough engineers and mapper and drafters for maps. And then he also sent the expedition off to the Pacific, right, to map the country and see what the hell was out there. So he was all over this. And Europeans had started to develop engineers in the early phases of the Industrial Revolution, and we just didn't have any. So this is one of the reasons Jefferson created the U.S. Military Academy. And it's one of the reasons in the 1900s, the engineer branch was considered the most esteemed branch. We have our own buttons still, right? We don't even wear U.S. Army buttons. We wear engineer buttons,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the first time it really rang true to me was when I went to Capitol Hill and I was the Army liaison to the House of Representatives.
Mhm.
And every Army officer who was going to come up and talk to Congress should come through my office. And I started noticing colonels wandering through the hallway in their uniforms. And I started asking, who are you guys? And why aren't you checking in with me? And they're like, well, we're with the Corps of Engineers. We don't do that. And it was almost like a separate military because I had not thought about how political it was for a district engineer, Corps of Engineer commander such as yourself, how political that is because you've got members of Congress who are very interested in what you do and don't do in those public hearings play a big role in some of those states. So I
Yes.
imagine you found yourself in that role as well.
Yes, so that's the agency's role, and for people who don't know, there's about 33,000 people in the Corps of Engineers agency worldwide, right? Most of them in the U.S., right? States and territories, and there's about 750 military. And the military is the chain of command. There is a three-star chief of engineers. He's the Army engineer. He works for the chief of staff of the Army and obviously the secretary of the Army. But Congress provides a lot of money directly to the Army Corps of Engineers to do work. It doesn't go through DOD and it doesn't go through the Army. And hence, they have kept the prerogative that we can talk to you anytime and you can talk to us anytime because we pay you. So, we expect our phone call to be answered. And so we do. We brief them all the time and we're on the Hill all the time, never really going through OCLL, although I would try to tell people, that let them know we're going to be in the building, but some of my aides, I suspect, were good at that and some weren't. But the Corps of Engineers, for those who don't know, it has a lot of functions that are surprising that accumulated over time. Started with lighthouses and then coastal channels. And, we began pulling roots and trees out of the rivers and the harbors and creating channels and started dredging in the 1800s. And it's grown into this system where we have 25% of all the hydropower in the US comes from Corps of Engineers dams. Most people don't have any earthly idea, right?
Right.
Recreation areas. We've created all sorts of flood management, flood control features through dams and reservoirs throughout the country and watersheds across the country. And they are lakes for all intents and purposes. And they've had a boom in real estate and recreational opportunities. And Congress has underwritten that function. And so Corps of Engineers recreation sites receive more visitor days per year than Disney Global Enterprises, which most people have no idea. It's cheap, it's free. You can come, you can recreate. There's bike trails, there's marinas, there's beaches, there's, recreational facilities, and there's water, that you can ski or swim or do whatever you want and boat in. Ecosystem engineering. So a lot of this has started as environmental restoration in the bad old days of heavy pollution in the industrial age in the 50s and 60s, but really now it's gone beyond restoration, because restoration implies that you're going back to some time. What year do we go back to? Really now it's just managing all our watersheds. We're 335 million people in the country. We're growing. We need a bunch of things from these watersheds, not just two things, right? Not just transportation or water supply. We need recreation. We need, biodiversity for the health of the nature and our own benefit, right? That we harvest the benefits of the biodiversity. Flood control is a purpose of the Corps of Engineers, a huge mission across the country, becoming even more important now that we have, increasing amounts of water falling on the country and sea level rise, relative sea level rise. So for coastal and inland communities, it's one of the things we talk about all the time. And you mentioned how political things get. All construction or choosing not to construct is a political decision.
Yeah.
And you can't avoid it. So don't, you're in the middle of it. You, as the engineer, the Army engineer, are there to give your best technical and engineering advice to the elected leaders, because they get to decide. Politics is done by them, and whatever it is, and that's what you execute, because you are an appointed official of the federal government. You're not elected. No one elected you. No one chose you. So we keep our snoot out of the public discussion of the issues, right? Even if sometimes some politicians like to put someone between them and a problem, and often that's the core, right?
Well, it goes to the very, I say core, but the very root of the way our military is designed in this country. I had a radio show yesterday and we were talking about this, but even with you having a single budget line, almost being a separate entity to operate in direct support of the American people, and with our military bases around the world and ports and things of that nature outside the continental United States, we still have to have a civilian leadership chain of command that's elected by the people. And that's why you're in there on Capitol Hill talking to the representatives of the people who have elected them for their districts to say, here's what we recommend. What are you going to do? What are you going to approve? And it's up to them to get the populace to agree or disagree with what it is they recommend. And we provide those resources. And I think a lot of people, that's what they miss, is when they see waterways, locks, dams, things of that nature, dredging, straightening rivers. I remember the big water dispute between, I think it was Georgia and Florida, Lake Lanier, if I remember correctly. That held Secretary McHugh's nomination by Congress. They held him at bay and held him up for 3 months to become the Secretary of the Army, until he would tell Congress he was going to make a decision to change that percentage of flow of water between Georgia and Florida to help the Everglades. And I remember thinking, why are they holding him hostage? And then it's because
because the agency that would execute that is his. Yeah,
it's his. Exactly. It's crazy stuff like that. Like when they turned and said there's a problem at Arlington National Cemetery, and we're like, oh, we got that too. We own Arlington National Cemetery and the grounds and all of the
not just Arlington, but the national cemeteries throughout the country are run through an Army office. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's things like that. Even when you're an officer, your whole career, all of a sudden you walk into this, you go, really? It's surprising, the scope and complexity. So
let me surprise you a little bit more before you go to your next question. And that is, the Corps of Engineers does regulatory functions for the Clean Water Act, which most people have no idea. Intensely political, right?
Give us an example.
So the key to remember is that two things: 9 out of 10 people that come to the Corps for a permit get it. You may not get it with your first plan. You may have to adjust your plan, right? But the Corps is there to enforce two things. First, it protects the federal channel and the rivers and the harbors. Can't mess with those. Anything you're going to put in the water, has to get a permit from the Corps. If it's a wetland, maybe it's a wetland, maybe it isn't. You got to get a determination. That's builders deal with that. And there's waters of the U.S. rules that the EPA promulgates that can be confusing. But the Corps doesn't regulate upland activity. That's the other thing I want you to remember. So if you want to build a store, you want to build a farm, you want to build a factory, Corps has no view about that. All we want to know is what are you putting, what takings of wetlands are you having? Therefore, you have to mitigate them, or what are you putting into the water so we can make sure that it doesn't foul it and screw up these environmental services that we need from the watershed, right? So the water supply, Corps does water supply and water supply storage. Corps does a lot of work for interagency. So a lot of the three-letter agencies have all their work done by the Corps because we have lots of ways to keep solicitations and designs secret and protected, right? Which not everybody does. We do a lot of work for international governments as either a U.S. foreign assistance program, or some foreign governments, many have brought their programs to the Corps of Engineers to be executed because they like the quality of the work they get and the confidentiality of the work, right?
Yep.
We've done some things for countries you wouldn't even believe that they would let a foreign government do it, right? Then they do all the military construction for the services, right? Around the things. Now the Air Force has some capability of its own, not enough for everything in the Air Force, and the Navy has a lot of capability of its own as well. The Naval Facilities Command is quite good, but we do support Navy bases in certain areas, and then other support to deployment locations. We sort of divided that up with the services, among them, and Corps does a lot of it. So those are some surprising things that most people know. We built DC schools.
Yep.
For the DC school district, right? Because they came to the Corps, they needed help, right? So it's all sorts of crazy stuff.
Very cool. So all these unique skill sets, all this unique knowledge, you retire from the Army and then you go into business for yourself. Tell us about the journey. How did you go about that?
Well, okay, as a precursor to departing, something I didn't know about the Corps till I went in it, and I only went in at a senior level. I was a military engineer through brigade command, right? And then I went to the Corps as a flag officer, and I did 2 division commands in the Corps. It was fabulous. But the Corps of Engineers is not directly funded. That means it's not part of the DoD budget. The Corps of Engineers agency, right?
Right.
That part is only project funded. So if there's work, you can have employees. If there's no work, you have to let employees go. This is not like the Army is going to have 450,000 they're getting paid for up front by the government.
They have to
Not
create
like that
their
at
own
all.
budget, is what you're saying.
So it's almost like running a business.
Yeah.
Except you can't make a loss because it's illegal to have a deficiency, as you know, now having done some contracts with the federal government.
Yeah.
A deficiency is illegal. You can't lose money, but you also can't make money because that's not why you exist. You're not here to harvest money from other government agencies, right? Or states or co-sponsors, local co-sponsors of civil works projects. You're there to execute the project. So you're managing your profit and loss band is 0.5%.
Oh, wow.
Headquarters keeps a little bit of money, to make sure to keep everybody above the line and nothing, no one's in the red. But you can't make money. So we are adjusting our overhead rates every quarter or every 2 months to make sure we're in that band. So it's like doing a tightrope act in business, which most businesses just need to be in the black, right? That's easy. Yeah. To me, right? So it's not like I entered the business world without sort of an understanding of what businesses had to do with deal with fixed costs versus outputs and all that stuff. So it was probably easier for me than maybe other Army officers, right? Because of this background. And I actually stumbled into what I'm doing now. I thought I would take my teal green pajamas off. They were still teal green back then when you're just changing to the modern camo, right? When I was leaving, and I put on a suit, and I would do a lot of similar things without the regulatory and without some of the government stuff, right? Whether it was, Jacobs North America or some, WSP or one of these big companies. And that's really what I saw in my future. But I had a cooling off period, which you know all about, right? As a senior officer. And during that time, you basically can't work with anything you made a serious decision on, you can't work on forever, right? And then in the world that you know best, you really can't work in it for a while and while you cool off. And that's good. I think it's a perfectly good rule. But I had to do a lot of public speaking in my last couple of gigs because I was a president of a civil military commission. Our work was inherently political, so I was making speeches and public talks all the time in the media. Um, and so I got a lot of invites when I got out of the Army to come and speak, and they pay my costs, they pay my honorarium. It wasn't a freebie anymore because I wasn't, on active duty. And that allowed me to do a couple things that I really enjoyed. I like going around the country, meeting people, understanding what they were dealing with and how they were trying to solve it, and trying to see if I could come up with some ideas with them. I love doing research to inform these talks, right? That's one of the things as a flag officer I regretted the most is I had no time to do my own research. I had to task staff to do it. And it didn't always come out, the way I would have ferreted it out. You know what I mean? And so it was okay, but not as delicious as it needed to be. But now I'm doing my own research. I enjoy it. I'm able to convey and compress and distillate complex ideas to help people understand them and grapple with them. And as I was making these speeches, and a lot of times they were about contentious issues like climate change and its impacts and how we have to respond to that, or how we might, because the way to respond is really what the debate should be about. It's happening. It's going to continue to happen. We are doing things that are causing it. We know this. This is all measured, and it's just data. But how best to address it? Well, it depends what you're maximizing. That's politics. It's not just science, right? So I started getting requests from some of the audience members, their organizations and entities, to help them actually with a problem and consult them. At the same time, my wife made it clear that she likes where we are in Cary, North Carolina, and she doesn't want to move to chase the work, right? And I looked at regional companies in the area that I might do what I used to do, in my last couple of gigs in the Army. And I realized that I managed programs 5-10 times the size of these businesses.
Yeah.
And there's no president of those companies that wants to hire me to replace them, right? I ran it was over $20 billion program in one of my divisions, $5.5 billion of construction going in the ground a year. There isn't a regional firm doing that kind of work. That's just much larger than what they do. So They were happy to rent me, though, to help them solve a problem. So I completely stumbled into this consulting thing, Chris. Don't get the wrong idea that this was a master strategy. But it's really great for me personally because I'm a curious person. I'm a lifelong learner. I like doing research and homework. I like thinking creatively, analytically, as well as, inductively, and thinking creatively to help solve a problem with maybe an unorthodox approach that no one's thought of before. I like solving problems. I'm an engineer, for heaven's sake, right? All we really want to be is a really useful engine, like Thomas the Tank Engine says. And it was perfect for me because I also wasn't doing the same thing forever.
Yeah.
It keeps it interesting for me. I get easily bored. I won't lie. It's a flaw, I suspect, but I am constantly learning. I am constantly exploring new areas, using great skills that are applicable, but I've got involved in a number of things, outside of professional work in terms of nonprofit boards and private volunteer activities that are fascinating. And so I never have a boring day.
No,
right?
no. Well, I mean, I think the big thing that you find for individuals who make the leap. Now, you and I are very different than most people who are probably watching this, where, we did 30 something years in the military, and then we have to end a career and start a new one. And so we have a motivator.
Yes, right. Yes,
Now,
very motivated. Yeah.
And so you have that Genesis motivator. Other entrepreneurs I talk to, they're always on that cusp to make that commitment. And I tell them what you just said, which is, if you're going to make the jump, if you're going to take the leap, figure out what your passion is. If you're going to do it, you got to love it. I mean, you got to love it. It can't be about the money. It can't be about, superfluous things. It has to be, I run to my office to do this every day. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, because the motivation to get the resources you need to continue to do what you want to do. And you have to be aggressive to go after it. You have to create an internal plan. You have to stick to your plan. There's no W-2 boss over your shoulder with a stick beating on you to get something done. And as you just said, you finally got to do your own research, really dig into a project and figure out how to solve it, which energizes you. And you're obviously very articulate, so you can go back and explain it to others, which you enjoy doing. Those are the kinds of things I think when you see people make this leap that are important for them to consider up front. Where you're going to live, how you're going to live, how much you're going to make. Those are all interesting, but in the long term, they become irrelevant. So good for you. That's a good explanation. Now, on this journey, you alluded to it, but I want to just hear your perspective. You've made many adjustments along the way. Were there some key bits of wisdom? Are those shifts and changes of why you made them, or is it just a continuation of pulling that thread of passion and figuring out where it's going to take you?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure I'm fully prepared to answer it well. I'll try to answer it. So adjustments happen all the time with me, right? The beautiful thing about being a consultant is that you only work on things you want to work on and with people with whom you want to work. So, as I got started, it was initially patchy, but then it quickly log rolled into steady stream of interesting projects and work, even though almost all the gigs were temporary. But I had to make a decision if I wanted to take extra work, did I want to hire on and create a firm?
Yeah.
And I ultimately decided that I didn't want to do that. I've done that. I was a platoon leader with 60 soldiers as a second lieutenant, first lieutenant, a company commander with 120, battalion commander with 725. And then I had a whole brigade working for me in Iraq during the invasion, when you were there with me, I had, 5 engineer battalions working for me, and then I was as a brigade. I had Seabees, Air Force, Army. I had 7,500 soldiers at any given time on my brigade, one, in Afghanistan, Iraq, and CONUS. So, and then the divisions in the Corps were big, but they were only about 5,000 each, right? So, and a different kind of group.
Only
average age 19. USACE average age 48, right? Very expert in their fields. Brigade, no one's an expert in their field, except maybe you, because you've been around long enough. So, it's a very different leadership challenge and very interesting. But I didn't need to be El Jefe again, and it would take me away from the things that I am loving doing as a consultant. So that was a huge change and adjustment, different than what I thought it would be when I got out, right?
Well, can we pull this thread on your El Jefe experiences?
Sure.
Because there's another part of the audience that wants to hear some pearls of wisdom on leadership or lack thereof. What are, we all have our isms. I'm sure there's some Duke isms that are out there.
Sure.
What are some of your isms that you'd like to share?
I guess first one refers back to something we were just talking about in the public speaking role. Good leaders can boil it down.
Yeah.
We're doing all this stuff. What does it mean?
Yeah.
Right. That's what troopers want to know. That's what your business teammates want to know. We're running around. We're doing all this crap. Why? What does it mean?
Yeah.
Why is it important? And if you don't tell them, then they're going to say, is it important? And maybe it isn't, right? And really, no one wants to work on something that isn't important. And everybody wants to work on a winning team, right? Yeah. So my personality and therefore leadership style is such that I'm a natural experimenter. I want to let's fail in new ways. We've seen all the same stupid mistakes at the National Training Center, at the Joint Readiness Training Center, at whatever. I don't want to make those same mistakes. We won't. Let's make new ones. Try new things, and we'll learn from those, right? And so, but to create a learning organization means you have to underwrite a certain amount of risk and potential lack of success on certain efforts. And if you don't, then you won't have a creative learning organization, right?
There you go.
So that's another thing I think people should keep in mind. If you want people to be creative, you have to give them the leeway to do so, right? The authority. And I did that through a permission statement. So yes, I had a vision. I won't say what it was for the military engineer units I commanded, because the audience probably won't resonate with them, but it would resonate with you. I think you'd love it. But I sent it to you, by the way, on email. You can look at it. But I also gave people a permission statement, which is, look, if you know something that's going to help improve this process, product, performance, whatever it is, our organization, our unit, whatever, and it's legal, moral, and ethical, and you're not afraid to talk about it in public with someone, it's not something sneaky or crappy, right? Then just do it. Don't ask my permission or anybody else's. Just do it,
Yeah.
right? And I ended it, a little riff on the Bible. For those who are religious, it may offend them. For those who aren't, it may be lost on them. But as you said, in the beginning was the deed, right? And that's true for you as a leader too.
In the beginning was the what?
The deed. In the
Oh, the
beginning was the
deed. The
deed,
deed.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
What do you do? I don't care what you say. What do you do?
Yeah.
Right? That's what people pay attention to, right? I mean, they'll pay attention to what you say if you do what you say, but if you
Yeah.
don't, they won't pay any attention to what you say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's very true. Wow. Okay. Well, that's probably the best answer we've gotten in all of our podcasts.
Oh, is that right? Well,
That was very good. No, and you hit a lot of the topics that we talk about, which is underwriting risk and the growth mindset by having underwriting the risk, always making sure your people understand the why. If you understand the why, then you create the initiative that you're talking about and the innovation. I like the letter. So did you just write like a policy letter? How did you approach that? And how did
well,
you
you
force that?
remember before battalion man, they sort of want you to think about your command philosophy and how you're going to approach your duties, and they make you kind of do a draft for an assignment, right?
Right.
But I really put a lot into it, and I tried to keep it simple. And I said, look, I should send this to the people I'm going to lead. They should know who they're dealing with, right?
Right.
And so when I took over, this is what I published, and I worked with my subordinate leaders, not just the company commanders as a battalion commander, not just the battalion commanders, but all the way down through the NCO ranks, and said, look, if you see me not operating this way, then you come tell me, because this is how to be a great unit.
Yeah.
And that's what I want, right? I want to be on a winning team too, right? I don't want to be on a team that's unhappy or not performing. And there's there's any number of things on here that we could talk about, but I think the biggest thing that we haven't talked about so far, and then I'll let you ask further questions if you want, is we talked about being a consultant and all my joys of it. There is some things you have to forego. Not everything's all positives, right? And one of the things I enjoyed when I was El Jefe and had lots of people to be responsible for and to guide and lead, and most important, to develop them, right? That was what I called human engineering. No one else calls it that, so it's not a term of art for anybody but me, but it's all about helping each of the people you're responsible for develop into what they can be, right?
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is great for your organization, your firm, your unit, whatever. Even it's just fabulous to see and unlock this potential with lots of things, by giving opportunities and responsibilities to people, by counseling, right, and mentoring, all sorts of stuff, assigning them where they have a greater chance of success while you still work on their deficiencies, whatever those are, with them, so they're not ignored. They're just not put in a place where they're more likely to fail than succeed, right? Because you've misassigned them.
Right.
Matching personalities, right, with teams.
Yep.
Huge. I never let the adjutant or the deputy brigade commander or the XO or anyone else assign my senior leaders, NCO and officers. I did that. I felt it was that important. And I also spent a lot of time doing counseling. It wasn't always in the office. It was out wherever we were, right? On a project site, in the woods, wherever. But they were lengthy and they were in great detail. In fact, I got teased a lot about it when I left battalion command. And the world record was there was one company commander who had a 4.5-hour counseling. He was the record holder. I won't tell you his name. He knows who he is.
Yeah. What was the term for that? We always call going for a walk in the woods. Best counselings I ever had, or best
Yes.
developmental situation. The leader just taking you by yourself out someplace, I guess coffee or whatever. But for
It
us,
doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah.
walk in the woods was always the best because it was so personal, and it
Yes.
even if you were making mistakes, it led you, well, at least it for me, it reinforced that that person actually cared and that they were actually watching and they were providing me valuable pearls of wisdom to get
Yes.
better. You're not in the woods getting yelled at, and you're not in front of people getting yelled at. The person is giving you very precise things to do on your personal pathway of growth. But yeah, I mean, and when we had leaders like you doing that to us, to me, that was a unit that I could have stayed in forever. But as with all of us, I think what's different about military leaders that civilian entities don't understand is, we're blessed if we're in a job for what, 12, 18 months. And then boom, you got another whole dynamic with another new leader, a whole new chain of command, a whole group of dynamics. And so we're constantly in that crucible of in and out, in and out, in and out with different kinds of leader styles. And just the exact opposite of something you just described. And you walk in and all of a sudden you've got a leader that is not providing a vision, is not giving you the why because you don't have a need to know. That they don't know what they want. They'll know it when they see it, which is
Oh
really
yeah. I
difficult for the
worked with
staff
those. Yeah.
officer. And they will throw you under the bus as soon as something goes wrong. They will not own up to it. They'll throw you under the bus. And that's when that drip, drip, drip of fight or flight kicks in. And that's the worst 18-month job you'll ever have. But at least
Yep.
in the Army, there's a potential end. And you can,
Right.
what's the old term you say? I can live with this bad leader. It's like I can stand on my head and gargle peanut butter for 18 months,
Right.
but
You
not
know
much
that next
longer.
year either they'll be gone or you'll be gone. Right.
Yeah. But it's a civilian business world. You don't have that option unless somebody gets fired or you quit. And the old adage that people vote with their feet in an organization. I'm curious about what you think about this because in the engineer world, you guys are very smart and you're very precise and you think things through. And as you admitted, you love to do the research as opposed to somebody doing it for you. And in that world, how difficult is it to communicate with individuals that are very self-sufficient, don't really seem to need to delegate things. How are you able to bring yourself to do that? And what kinds of leaders have you seen that don't do that made life difficult for you?
I so there's a two-part question. You obviously went to grad school.
Sorry.
I'll start with the last part first because I remember it, and you have to re-ask the first part. Um, so the worst, most harmfully impactful leader I ever saw was a guy who had a tendency to re-remember things as new events occurred,
Yeah.
and it would always, casting past events in a very negative light that wasn't really accurate, right? Well, because someone made a mistake today, that means they were making a mistake all along, right? And it was devastating to the unit. I mean, this guy, he was a man. I was a lieutenant. I was a platoon leader when he showed up, and had a wonderful battalion commander. It was my first battalion commander. Was wonderful, really good. And uh, this guy took over, and he was brilliant. PhD nuclear engineer. Not a fool. Not he was physically fit. He wasn't. There was nothing that you could look at and say this guy is not going to succeed. But his personality was just awful and terrible for the job of leadership. And I learned then how much impact the boss has on an enormous group of people. He would, if he showed up pissy in the morning, excuse my language, angry or irritable in the morning, by noon, everybody in the battalion's carping at each other, right?
Yeah.
I saw it because unfortunately I got a front row seat because I got plucked out of my platoon leadership role after 19 months. And then he made me the adjutant S1. because I was the only guy in the battalion with an Ivy League degree.
Yeah, you were
So
the
I became his
HR
adjutant.
manager all of a sudden, so you're working directly with him. Oh,
So I'm the adjutant. I'm drafting his correspondence. I'm doing all sorts of stuff, and it was Europe. So we had mail and we did ration cards, things that could put you in jail. It was 1,000 soldier battalion in 5 cities in Germany. It was monstrous. I had 3 couriers on the road all the time. Anyway, we don't need to talk about that. This guy was deadly to this unit. It was a good unit. It was a successful unit, and it just went south. And honestly, he wanted to succeed and he wanted it to be a good unit, and he just didn't have any of the leadership skills. Tone deaf to his audience, um, no concept of sequencing or managing the energy of your team.
yeah.
No one can operate at peak performance all the time, obviously. So when do you want to peak? You need to plan it, right? For when you absolutely have to have it. Um, all sorts of missteps in just communication. And willfulness. And I think ultimately it was fueled by a deep sense of personal insecurity. I don't know why. He had every reason to be secure. He'd been in Vietnam. He was a lieutenant colonel. He had a PhD in nuclear engineering. The guy was accomplished. I mean, no one's going to look at him and say, you're not worthy of this position. And yet, we had drafted a plan for the officers. I'll give you another example. A plan for the officers. He went away, whether he was on leave or TDY for a week. I don't remember what it was, but it was ready. He had already approved the slate because I didn't make the slate. I drafted the slate for him, and then he made the slate. And the XO said, "Well, is this done?" I said, "Yes, the boss has approved this slate. I'm just waiting for him to sign it." Now, sometimes I could sign for the commander, but I didn't feel like I was a first lieutenant adjutant. I wasn't going to sign reassigning captains, with my signature because I didn't need that kind of heat. But so the XO was the acting commander. He signed it. Well, the battalion commander comes back the next week, and he was fit to be tied that the XO had signed this document, and he rescinded it. He said, "I can change anything that major signs." Yeah. And I didn't say it, but inside I'm thinking, yeah, I know you can, but why would you want to? This is your plan. It was insane. So it wasn't results oriented.
Yeah.
No, and I personally, I'll never understand people that aren't results oriented. I can't. It's not in me. I'm an engineer. I like to believe that I'm endlessly and infinitely practical. I'm sure that my wife will tell you that I'm not. And those that know me best will say, not always, but I try, right? I try to be.
Yeah, you aspire to be that.
And by
Well,
the way, you got to encourage feedback. So we were talking about counseling earlier,
yeah.
and I'll use this line, but always, I think I'm relatively self-aware, but there's always room to be made more self-aware. Someone smart told me a long time ago, feedback is the breakfast of champions.
Yeah, there you go.
And tried to live by that rule, soliciting it too. Those counseling sessions were also me interactive. It was interactive. It wasn't, directional, right? I'm transmitting to you and you receive.
Oh yeah,
So yeah, you have to, and you'll find out some surprising things
yeah.
because you think you're projecting one thing, and because the audience is a little different than you thought, they're receiving it a very different way.
Oh yeah, yeah. And we've talked about emotional intelligence and and the social intelligence and the self-awareness piece of that, which is the bridge between the two is empathy. But yeah, you're right. Because guys like me, the hardest, like you and I think to a degree, because I've never seen your Myers-Briggs or any other personality test, but I make assumptions based upon your demeanor that we're both somewhat on the extroverted spectrum, maybe.
I'm a quarter solution extrovert.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're in there. And so you and I actually need feedback just by our very nature. We need it. It's not a we want to ingratiate and we want to hear great things about it. We need feedback because if we don't get it, something's wrong. And
Right.
and what you find and what I eventually found in the command levels that you're talking about was I had people either I worked for or people in my command who didn't need feedback. They were more on the introverted side of the
Yeah.
scale. And what they needed is they needed to save energy throughout the course of the day in order to be
Yes.
most effective. And they needed their space. And someone like you and I kind of plow into their space looking for feedback. and we become an energy vampire, just kind of sucking that critical energy they need away. So they don't understand, that no news is not good news to you and I.
Right. Right.
But man, for us, we have to understand for them, no news is good news. And so what you were talking about that commander, sometimes I would get really upset and try to keep it to myself that I was upset. Let's say I was upset with you. And my way of letting you know that was to not talk to you. I just gave you some space for about 3 or 4 days, and that was hard for me to do. To me, I had to discipline myself not to talk to Duke for a couple of days because I'm upset with him and I'm afraid what I might say.
Right.
And if you were introverted, you might go, "Oh, good, it's over." And he's leaving me alone.
Right. He got the wrong lesson from it. Yeah, or she. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
get the exact opposite lesson. You're
Yeah.
exactly right. And so that's interesting. The second part of my graduate level question was, and I just was curious to hear your perspective, and it may have been true in this example you gave,
Yeah.
but what I found was started noticing, I think it was Odierno that finally said, the chief of staff of the Army one day, it may have been, or help me if I got the wrong guy, but one of them suddenly said, I value character over competence. He said, competence, the problem with us being at war for so long, for 20 something years, is that we have reinforced confidence and we've let character take a back seat.
Hmm.
And when he described that at the Army Commanding General Staff College, when I first heard him say it to the commander's course,
Yeah.
he said, what's happened is that we've been reinforcing individuals who have been high performers and their statistics and their outcomes and everything are stellar.
Yeah.
But you go in and you open up the door and you walk into the unit, and the culture and the individuals in there is horrible. They're stressed. There's no communication. People are working in a fearful environment. It's just a bad apple once you look past the pretty red skin.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about that. And so you step back and you start thinking. At first, I thought of every unit I was in that was high performing.
Yeah.
And remember, yeah, that leader I hated working for that person.
Right.
And then the organization that was doing what it was supposed to be doing was doing it well, was fun to be in. Okay.
Yeah.
We got the same things done. We just weren't as pretty or flashy or
Right.
overt about it. And, the silent professional approach. And then you can worry about the other things that are mediocre and focus over there. But I'm curious, yeah, he came in and destroyed a good unit. But were you high performing? Was that what his focus was looking good to hire at the expense of his people?
His focus really was to look good at the expense of his people. I mean, his involvement with people beyond his personal staff and the company commanders was zero. He wasn't a guy who talked to troopers.
Yeah.
He wasn't interested in their existence and what it was like and what they were dealing with, their challenges, and he wasn't really developing even his core group of people that he was managing, right?
Right.
And all that was, this is a guy that doesn't care about you, about us, and no one wants to be in a situation like that. It stinks, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't like it. The people that are in it don't like it, and it affects their outlook, behavior, performance in all negative ways, and so it's really bad. I mean, the if everyone in the unit can succeed, the unit's going to be great.
Yeah.
So why are you not invested in that as the leader? You're the custodian of this thing,
Right.
that you should be helping everyone to succeed, because in the end, no one really, people have bad days and they have other things that are distracting them, problems in their life, but no one's showing up saying, I want to screw this up today, right? They just
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, we could talk about this for hours, but the motivation for the individual to make themselves look good at the expense of the organization, in my experience, is the worst one to be in. And so if we've got leaders out there that are worried about their performance and their numbers and their next promotion, what happens is they become so self-centric in the organization, they forget about the power of the team. Simon Sinek, you've read some of Simon's books and seen his podcast, and he's constantly talking about, if you get the team right, whatever your business is will be successful. And I agree with him wholeheartedly.
Yes.
But I think the other interesting thing, and we were both raised this way. There's no I in team and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that always got me that really stuck true, and I see it all the time, was you always give credit, for a compliment that comes to your organization, you give credit to the organization or the individual in your
Yes.
organization. And if something bad happens, you own it as the leader. Yeah, you take on
Because you
all.
do.
Yeah,
Because you do own it.
and I loved that when I was a kid, as a young lieutenant, come out of the range, say, hey, some colonel would say, this is a great rifle range. And I remember my first platoon sergeant said, and when that happens, you say, if there's no one there but you say, sir, thank you, but I will tell the men.
Yeah.
You will tell the men the compliment to them.
Yes.
Or you take the opportunity to grab the range lieutenant and sergeant and say, sir, don't tell me, please come with me, tell them, and give the credit
Yeah.
to those who
Yeah.
have actually done it. And I think that to me was just inbred in me as the way what right looks like in leadership. And so it's hard to come out into the world with a different philosophy where you have to sell yourself. And I think, back to the entrepreneurial question, the hardest thing for a soldier to do, here you are, tens of thousands of people in command, and you go out into the civilian world and your leadership skills, your ability, your experience is not translatable to an organization. So instead of hiring you as the boss, they make you a consultant. And the same is true for my experience. You come out here and go, wow, yeah, it must be rough to have 37 people in your company. Um, and try not to be a sarcastic person about it.
No, 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 no. I mean, look, platoon leader challenges were challenges. I mean,
Oh yeah.
whatever age you are, it doesn't matter. There were some real challenges that we managed. Some we succeeded, some we didn't. We chaptered a few people out that couldn't make it. Whatever.
Yep,
So
yep, very true. Well, hey, we're coming into our hour here. Any parting thoughts of wisdom and anything you'd like to push out to either our clients or potential clients or just anybody watching this video?
I guess there's probably an infinite number of things I could pick, right? Because there's so much that is of value. A business, for those who are in business watching this, business is a lot like war, only less shooty. You have an environment you're operating that can be hostile, can be friendly, can be volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. You have threats, you have assets, you have things you want to keep out of the eyes of your competitors, your threats, right? And you have things you need to know about them. You have all sorts of stuff. So you need a lot of the tools that we used in war are absolutely applicable to business without the mass violence, thank goodness. And uh, so hiring military people for your organization is extraordinarily beneficial. Number one, they know how to work, right? They have a work ethic. They have discipline. Self-discipline is not self-taught. They have been taught it, right? And that's tricky because most businesses don't see themselves in their business model as teachers of self-discipline. But if you're hiring young people and people right out of college, you're going to have to teach a little bit of it, right? Because where else are they going to learn it, right? If
Yeah,
they haven't already learned it. The Army will do it. It starts right out trying to teach that, right? So that's helpful. The other thing is everything in life is teamwork. Even an author who sits alone in upstate New York or in Maine writing books has an agent, has an editor, has a publisher, has referees for articles to go to public magazines, or streaming content, or someone who helps post their stuff in a Substack or whatever. No one is a sole player, and so none of your success is yours alone. And every great achievement of humans has been an enormous team effort that involved incredible negotiation within the team and with external forces to the team, right? If I could recommend anything to business people, whether you think you need it or not, taking some additional uh, development, whether it's for your firm, for yourself personally, or if you're still a student in school, taking a negotiation class. because you don't get in life what you deserve, you get what you negotiate.
Yeah.
And if you haven't exercised those skills, it's hard
Yeah.
to know what to do or how to play situations. Only practice. And as you've come up through this team effort that is the Army over the years, you learn how to negotiate, right? With clans and tribes, with governments, foreign militaries, with, civilian partners in the interagency, with your fellow teammates within your own service, your other services. It's all a huge negotiation. No one. I think there's some misunderstanding among civilians who've never been in the military that it's all very autocratic and dictatorial, and we just give a directive and thus it is made so. Nothing works
No.
like that. And as an engineer, I'm going to refer back to construction. So I used to, my son was, while he was growing up, I would, everywhere we drove and we saw all sorts of stuff built, right? And I would point to every freaking building and say, okay, Nicholas, there were a bunch of people who were against this building being built here. Inevitably, it wasn't easy. It was
Yeah.
hard. It had to be negotiated. Why? What will it be? What will it include? It needs to include these things. It doesn't need to include, everything about it is hard. If you see someone doing something really well and it looks really easy, that just means they're really, really good at it, because it's very hard. Trust me.
Very true. Okay.
If you don't believe me, try to play golf.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. It was great to have you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to chat with you, Chris.